Good morning, students. Today's lesson will help you with your assignments. So the slides I will be covering will be giving you the guidance to finish the assignments. So the first thing is describing a language in context. The following points that you need to look at and make sure would be to acts or rules that we learn about the language is offered in a specific context. For example, in a story or a song or in a game. So the type of context will determine whether the language would be appropriate. While studying or reading the stimulus material, the language aspects, for example, the verbs, the nouns, so all the different parts of speech, make sure you know them and use them within context. Revert to the teaching of language rules. So those are all the rules that you need to apply to English. What are the grammar rules? We are teaching a second language. If you are teaching a second language, the grammar rules plays a huge part in this. It is not the child's natural or mother tongue, and all aspects of the language are not known to the readers. In that case, when it's not your first language, you need to make sure that you focus on the grammar rules, because the grammar rules sets out the language for you. It helps you to understand it better. The teacher has to make the call. When must rules be taught? And when can the learners learn to the required aspects by practice with no reasoning? Obviously, within a language and within context, it's always better to have the reasoning, but it would fall on the teacher's discretion when to apply these rules and when to make sure that the reasoning is applicable. Then, to compare the deductive and the inductive learning. What is deductive learning? It is the grammatical explanations or rules that are presented and then applied throughout practice in exercises. And the difference in inductive learning is where the learners are presented with examples. They then discover or deduce language rules and principles on their own. So in short, the deductive is basically the theory. That's what you get. These are the rules, this is how it works. The inductive learning is when you apply it. You've learned these following things and now you apply your own knowledge upon it. Piaget's theory of how children learn and their understanding. He quoted saying, "Cognitive development is a progressive reorganization of mental processes as a result of biological maturation and environmental experience. Children are constrained by their individual stage of intellectual development. They cannot undertake certain tasks until they are psychologically mature enough to do so. So that's why we have certain tasks and certain learning processes happening at a certain stage and phase. There is an emphasis on discovery learning rather than teacher imparted information. The readiness to learn when learners are to progress is different for each individual. That's why students develop at their own pace. There's no need in teaching a student certain things and they're not ready. And that's why scaffolding is also so important. First, you have to build it. It's like a building block. The foundation has to be set properly before you can build on that. The idea of linear development through stages has been widely used in the design and scheduling of school criteria. So you need to know that how his theory works for you, who will be a teacher, to implement it in class one day. The suitability for the following activities in primary. So there's different types of activities and how is it suitable to implement it in primary school. There's the gesture game. What does that inquire? After introducing the verbs to the students, cut up the cards and put them in a box. Have one student come to the front of class and take a card. The student then should act out the verb using gestures. The student sitting down then must say what the verb the student is mimicking. It's kind of like charades. You have to perform without speaking, so you have to just use your body language to show, and then the rest of the class should guess what it is. Then the simple old game we all know, Simon Says. This is a classic EAL game. You should know this already. Okay, you guys can go look up how Simon Says works and then implement it within your primary activities. Time raced. All the cards are put in a pile on the floor. The students must go and pick up a card, go to the teacher and say the target expression. For example, I can dance. If the student does not make a mistake, the teacher takes the card. When all the cards have been picked up by the students and passed on to the teacher stops the timer. The time is announced. Students then try again to beat their time. So you have to use a timer with this game. Then, what is the blackout syndrome? Stimulating creative thinking within learners. This inquires, in this exercise, students are medical investigators. And as a blackout paralysis city, they are called in to investigate outbreak of a new disease. They need to take steps to identify how it's transmitted, characterize it, and figure out how to treat it. The mystery tests literacy, problem-solving skills, and deductive reasoning. Students investigate why people have fallen ill, do lab tests in order to decide what kind of pathogen is involved, and work on solutions and how to best counter the disease. A conclusion offers further research readings. Basically, this would also help students to develop and to be able to write up a scientific process that's similar to the blackout syndrome. Questions teachers should ask before teaching a new language, structure, or function. What are the objectives of this class? What is my aim? What am I aiming at the end of this lesson for these students to learn? Is the class preparing for an examination? Is the class improving their English for business purposes? Is the class preparing for summer holidays? So you need to determine, what do I want to do with this at the end of the day? The second question, what type of learning background do the learners have? Are the students at school? Have they not studied for a number of years? Are they familiar with grammar terminology? So in that sense, you have to find out their prior knowledge. What do they know already? And where do they come from? Because that would determine what they would know. Then the third question would be, what learning materials and resources are available? Do you have the latest student workbooks? Do you have no workbooks at all? Is there a computer in the class? Do you have a smart board? What are the resources to your availability? And then you have to use it accordingly. The fourth question, what kind of learning style does each student have? This is very important because you need to first determine how the students learn best. Are they visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learners? Because if a student is kinesthetic, which means they have to move around, they have to touch things, they have to feel the equipment in their hands, then they will not be able to learn thoroughly if you are just giving it orally and they have to listen. So what I've written there with the points is the learner comfortable with standard right brain learning techniques, meaning logical charts, study sheets, or are they left brainers? Are they more creative? Do they need to figure things out for themselves? Do they need highlighters? Do they need pictures to go with their learning? Does the learner work better with listening and repeating exercises? As we know, we all learn differently, and sometimes it's necessary to do a certain activity again, but in a different method. And that would be the repeating exercise, so that they can make sure they understood what they did. Okay. When we are using novels to teach adverbs, and not just adverbs, any part of speech, you can use any novel to teach different parts of speech. In this instance, teaching adverbs. After you have read and discussed the story, do the following. Choose 10 sentences from the story, or make up your own sentences about the story. In these sentences, use verbs. For example, walk, ran, cried, sing, but do not add any adverbs. Write the 10 sentences on sentence strips. Divide the class into 10 groups. Each group receives one sentence strip. Each group has to write down 10 words describing the verb. That means the adverbs. Each member of the group gets the opportunity to read out their sentence with one of their adverbs included. You can do this as a class competition where each learner who gives a correct sentence receives a point for the team, and each learner who uses 2 adverbs in the same sentence receives 2 points. So that would bring in some competition, and depending on how you want to do it, you can also give out prizes for it. Okay, rules to keep in mind when setting up multiple choice questions. The first rule is to test comprehension and critical thinking, not just recalling. Use simple sentence structure and precise wording. Place most of the words in the question stem. Make all distractors plausible. Avoid double negatives. Mix up the order of the correct answers. Keep the number of options. Avoid tricking test takers. Use all of the above and none of the above with caution, meaning don't use that regularly. Have your different sets of answers, so A, B, C, D, and stick to each question to have 4 different options, or 3 or 4, 5. It depends how you want to set up the test. But stick to these rules when you set up questions that's multiple choice. Okay, it's very important again to go through the different parts of speech. The different parts of speech that's very important for primary and secondary would be nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections. You can look at the table that's on the screen. Those will give you the function of each part of speech. They will give you example words and example sentences. If you know these, then you know your grammar rules. Adjectives. An adjective modifies a noun or a pronoun by describing, identifying, or quantifying words. An adjective usually precedes the noun or the pronoun which it modifies. Now, we get different types of adjectives. You need to know them. You need to know when you see these words that this is the type of adjective and what it does. The first one is a possessive adjective. For example, my, your, his, her. You possess it, you have it, it's yours. So that those words are applicable to it. It is similar or identical to a possessive pronoun. However, it is used as an adjective and modifies a noun or a noun phrase, as in the following sentence. I can't complete my assignment because I don't have the textbook. So there's the example. Look at the definition. Make sure you know that this is a possessive adjective. The demonstrative adjective, it's to demonstrate. This, these, that, those, and what are identical to the demonstrative pronouns, but are used as adjectives to modify nouns or noun phrases. For example, when the librarian tripped over that cord, she dropped a pile of books. So that explains, it shows it demonstrates what happened to her. An interrogative adjective means when you interrogate someone, you want to find out, you're asking which and what is like an interrogative pronoun, except that it modifies a noun or a noun phrase rather than standing on its own. For example, which plants should be watered twice a week? Then, the indefinite adjectives. An indefinite adjective is similar to an indefinite pronoun, except that it modifies a noun, pronoun, or noun phrase, as in the following example. Many people believe that corporations are undertaxed. Now, the word that you have to look for there is many, because it's indefinite. We don't know how many, we don't know the exact numbers, but it tells us that there's a lot of people, according to the example of the sentence. Then we get adjectives of quantity, and they tell us how much or how many. Then there are sections of quantity. Quantity in bulk, such words as little, much, some, no, any, considerable, all of those ones are singular nouns to express an indefinite measure of the things spoken of. Quantity in number, which may be expressed exactly by numbers or remotely designated by words expressing indefinite amounts. Then you have the distributive numerals, which occupy a place midway between the last two subdivisions of numeral adjectives, for they are indefinite in telling how many objects are spoken of, but definite in referring to the objects one at a time. Then you get adjective of quality, or those adjectives which describe a noun or a noun phrase. Then you need to look at prefixes and suffixes. What is a prefix? A prefix are added to the beginning of a word to make a new word. Common prefixes that we can find are pre, mis, sub, inter, and semi. Now that means you add that to a word. So prepare, so you prepare something. Misled, I was misled by you. Misunderstood. And with each one, it tells you also what it means. For pre, it means before something. To mislead or to misunderstood, it means it's not a good thing. It happens in a bad way. Sub means under. So I submerge you under the water. It means you are being placed under the water. Inter is between. So the intermission was quite short, which means you were in a movie that was very long and there was an intermission, so it stopped to give you a bit of a break. And then semi, which means half. A semi, I can't think of an example now. Okay, suffixes. Suffixes are the letters added to the end of a main word or called suffixes. The common suffixes are ed, full, ly, ing, able, ons, ens, and ness. So for example, the words that you can find with suffixes would be neatness. So the neatness of the room would be explained with the ness, that would be a suffix. The distance would have the ance. Let me think. Beauty and beautiful, and then change and changing, and that's how it changes the word, and also to use it properly within context. Okay, types of adverbs. So we have different types of adverbs as we have different types of pronouns and different types of adjectives. Adverb of time. An adverb of time tells us when something is done or it happens. He collapsed and died yesterday. So the focus would be on yesterday because that is when it happened. His factory was burned down a few months ago. Again, a few months ago would be the determining of the time. And last week we were stuck in the lift for an hour. Now, just be aware that when you have these different types of adverbs and adjectives, it doesn't mean that it has to be just one word. It could be like a short phrase within the sentence that will determine the time or the place or the different aspects that they would ask. Then the second one is adverb of place. An adverb of place tells us where something is done or happens. We can stop here for lunch. So it determines where you want to go. Within the sentence, they're not saying what the here is, but here would be the place. The schoolboy was knocked over by a school bus. So how did it happen? Over. They rushed for their lives when fire broke out in the floor below. And there are many, many more examples. Adverb of manner. An adverb of manner tells us how something is done or happens. My brothers were badly injured in the fight. How were they injured? Badly. They had to act fast to save the others floating in the water. At the advanced age of 88, she still sang very well. So it's how it happens. Then, adverb of degree. An adverb of degree tells us the level or extent that something is done or happens. Her daughter is quite fat for her age, so quite would be the appropriate or would be the determining factor for the degree, because they tell you that she's quite. The accident victim nearly died from his injury. He didn't, but nearly. So that means he was badly injured. After all these years, she's still feeling very sad about her father's death. So it tells you that it's not just sad, but that it's very, and very is an extreme word. So it tells you the degree of how sad she is. Then, adverb of frequency. An adverb of frequency tells us how often something is done or how it happens. They were almost 50 when they got married. He hardly ever says something nice to his wife. While overseas, he frequently phoned home. So those are the words to look out for when we talk about frequency, how often it happens. There we go. So those are the slides that you can use for the assignment that will come up. If there's anything else that you don't understand and you need a little bit of extra explaining, please, you can SMS me at this number, or you can email me and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you.